really about it's about transformation. But my belief about transformation is a lot of times it comes in those moments where we are a little bit knuckleheaded. Maybe when we're not our best selves. At least that's been my experience. That's my experience. And so the book, it looks at sort of those moments, those knuckleheaded moments, in a variety of ways, but a lot in the arena of teaching, which is kind of my primary work experience, but then also interpersonal relationships. And I found that a lot of the transformation and also humbling moments have come through relationship and in marriage. So I'm going to start out with a marriage poem. My wife can't be here, but she's given me the okay to read this one. The poet considers his marriage. Marriage has made him want to finish more of his sentences, has made him want to start more too, find out how they end. The poet thinks, maybe this one job, I can do this one well. He plans for her surprise birthday party. He calls some of her friends, texts others, emails some, talks to her parents, thinks about a place she might like to eat. The poet was not born into a world of pain. He's almost 35 years old, he's never been to war, still has both of his parents. So why does he write this poem? He looks at others who need to write and thinks, yes, but why me? Why do I need the next line? Marriage has taught him to wait for storms in good weather and storms, salt and sugar, the old cliches. He's planning her surprise party, and he shouldn't be surprised that sometimes this makes him feel like he deserves a pat on the back. Marriage has taught the poet he's not nearly as good as he thought he was. For example, he ate the last bit of leftover pasta last night, and there was nothing left for her. And do you know what he thought? He thought, yes, I am planning the surprise birthday party. He has to have a beer at the end of the day. He has to have coffee at the start. He tells himself if he doesn't ignore the small, simple facts, perhaps then he will discover something profound. How's that working out for him, you ask? Sometimes he's scared of powerful women, like his wife. When she yells at him, he's afraid. He tries to crawl into a hole in himself, placed in his history way back, like when he was a little child, trying to escape the wrath of his mother. He knows this is not very mature. He is planning this surprise party because she once told him she wanted one. She said, wouldn't it be great if I could have a surprise birthday party with all the friends from my life? She said it twice. The poet said, duly noted, and he did note it. During their last fight, when she said, you never think of me, and he said, that's not true, and she demanded evidence, he said he couldn't. He said, it's not something I can talk about. He was very proud of himself then. You know what he's thinking about? This surprise birthday party he's planning for her. You see, he's not such a bad guy after all. He can keep a secret. That's the first poem. So that's a marriage poem, which is one way that I find knucklehead in myself. And let me give you a teaching poem. So I've been teaching for 15 years, but I stepped away from teaching after 7 years. Was working marketing and advertising for a couple years in Chicago, and missed the classroom a lot. And it was interesting because some of the students that I missed were the students that when I was actually teaching were the ones who were the hardest to work with. And that's kind of where the title of the book comes from. So this is the title poem, thinking about, it's kind of a composite of the knuckleheads that I used to teach, and now I'm back in the classroom again teaching. And it's in Chicago, so you might hear some Chicago references. Knucklehead. I can still see the sneer on your freshman face. Hear the Spanish you spoke with brutal grace. Chingate pendejo rolling off your tongue. Still see the stare I used to no effect. I was so young. From other teachers, I heard the same. You like to see us boil over. It was a game. Go ahead, say, I got to you. Say, admit it. Another month of me, you might have quit. Maybe. But this isn't about settling scores. This is me turning on lights, opening doors. I survived you is ugly. But so is forgive. So is I've learned so much. What is this then? This thing in my lap on the train? Is this a poem? I get on, I'll get off again. Western, Montrose. The stops pass me by. Meanwhile, I keep trying to pin it down. I keep telling myself, today will be the day it clicks. You'll see. I could say, knucklehead, that you're a leaf. Could say, we teachers, conductors, we're the trees. I could say, we watch you fall. But none of that's it. Not at all. What you are now, I'll never see. And the thoughts, the words you kept from me remain your own. My truth. I'm still reaching for something lost when I left teaching. If you find it, knucklehead, finish my poem and tell me how your life has come home and what you grieve and do not grieve and all you love and do not leave. So that's Knucklehead. Title poem. So another track in this book is also this track of faith. So I have a complicated, uneasy, but real relationship to the Catholic Church, cradle Catholic, as they say. But I think that my connection now happens a lot through the imagination. And I think I really like to reimagine the familiar stories and try to understand them in new ways. So the story of Paul is something that's really important to me right now. And so I like to think of him as kind of like the proto-knucklehead of the Christian story, because I mean, he essentially was a murderer. Something happened. He saw something, claims it was Jesus, and then he's a different person after that. So this poem is the opening poem of the book, and it's from that story, Saul being knocked to the ground. So I'm going to read from the old school King James version. I kind of like that. It's a passage from Acts, and I'll read the poem. This is from Acts. And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. The poem's called, and it's in the voice of Paul. It's a persona poem. If you would understand what happened on the road to Damascus, open your mouth, your tongue, put it out. Let it wait. Let it wait till it is dry and cool. Let it wait past the point, long past it, when you think, here I am, a grown man standing here like a child. And your hands, hold them out too. Open them and let them wait too. If you would understand, want to know what I knew, you would wait. Hold yourself for as long as you can in this way till the voice speaks, and you know the man, though you cannot yet place from where. You know that voice. And only now open your eyes. And now the choice is made. Though now you see him, now you're on the ground. Why? Why? He asks, why? All why. It is the only sound you can hear. Take it in. You know you must answer, but you don't know how to. Your mouth is a dancer without music, without rhythm, without a clue of how to move. You try. The words die within you. He is no guide. He's gone, and you are left with why. It echoes in the dark. It settles down to die. It penetrates your bones. You feel it in the thud. Why? Beat. Why? Beat. Why? Beat. Why? Beat. In the heart, in the blood, he lives, and you know it. Lives like birds or trees. Lives like branches growing. His shade is cool. is free. That was, if you'd understand what happened on the road to Damascus. There are kind of two poets that I think without these two, like this book wouldn't come to existence. One of them is my mentor from Hamlin, Deborah Keenan. I'm going to read a poem from hers in a second. The other is a Jesuit priest, Father Joseph Brown. He's collaborated with a lot of different projects with me, Cristo Rey. But he inspires me because he does this kind of stuff, I think, a lot better than I do, where he really enters into the scriptural stories and is really interested to focus on the margins of those stories. And really interested in kind of, he counts it, don't make it into the official version. So he wrote a poem that I want to read to you because I think it's cool in readings to bring other voices into the mix, especially voices that made the poems that you're writing possible. So he's definitely that for me. So this is a poem from Joseph Brown, Father Joseph Brown, S.J. It's called The Shore Peter Remembers. And so he's thinking about, if you know the story, Jesus died, Peter, having betrayed Jesus, is kind of lost, bereft. He goes back to the only thing he knows how to do, which is fishing. He's fishing, and then I think John recognizes, oh my goodness, that's the Lord on the shore, and he jumps in and goes and finds Jesus, and Jesus has this conversation with him on the shore. So this is another persona poem from Peter's point of view. The Shore Peter Remembers by Father Joseph Brown. The days choked me. No place we walked, no tree, no well, no wall could keep the wound from searing, bleeding. So when brother said, let us take the boat and seek fish, it was automatic. I can do that and not think. And I kept thinking. We all did. Nothing remained but our amputated hearts. Where can we go? Sailing Tiberias Sea is nowhere far enough. 2. The voice stopped us, confused the sense of time, dream-like we cast nets as we were bid, and when the weight was inescapable, I knew, oh God, I knew that I had lied all along. I had not quit the shores of hope. I had not sailed in despair. I knew and found breath to leap toward the voice. 3. He handed me the food and forced my eyes into his, what was left of love. I shook. My body embarrassed me with its stiff response, not here, not now, and I trembled. What is left to love? And I wept for all the lies I had lived. What is left for? To love. To crawl out of the cave of my own shame, to push myself onto a scaffold of my own devising, to love, to feed, to leap when I am called into air, into nothingness. He handed me a meal and told me to feed them until there is nothing left to love. It will be enough. That's Father Joseph Brown, The Shore, Peter Remembers. And one of the reasons I wanted to read that poem especially is because it inspired a poem in this book. One of the really hard things about teaching is losing students. Like 5 students at Cristo Rey have died in the past 5 or 6 years. This was one of the students I taught, David, and I want this poem to honor him. But it's really interesting because I couldn't have written this poem without the poem that I just read from Father Brown. So it's for my student, David, but it's also in conversation with Father Brown's poem, and I think you'll see that. The poem is called Left to Love for David. At the end of a summer, at the beginning of a school year, in the middle of a pandemic, in the where are we of a fight for racial justice, a young man, an old student of mine, dies. There is no sense to it. 18 years old, the class of 2020. He was 18 years old since the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic. I say these words as if in the pandemic's mouth, as it closes over me, even grief is made a little darker. I've thought of you, Father, you Jesus follower, you poet, you priest. Into the waters of the word you have dived so many times and let your eyes adjust to seeing underwater, like Peter who dived into the sea and came up for air to talk with the risen one. You said, he handed me a meal and told me to feed them until there is nothing left to love. Mama's voice from Raisin in the Sun, that time she caught her falling son and loved him like the Jesus follower she was too. There is always something left to love, she said. Father, there is nothing left of my student but stories now, memories. I play the audio of his college essay that I find in my email. I hear him talk about his dream of playing soccer in the pros, of making his family proud. He goes on and on, well past the limit of 650 words. And I am grateful for his breaking the rules now. Now there's a little more of him left to love. Are we doing time? Maybe 2 more poems? Okay. So I want to make sure to read a poem by Deborah, and then I'll do one last poem. Deborah Keenan, I don't really know what to say other than I love Deborah Keenan. She's such a force of goodness in the poetry community here in the Twin Cities, and she taught me for 5 years. So I was teaching full time at Cristo Rey, and then was getting an MFA part time, and she was just an amazing mentor. But she wrote a poem for her mother that I really love, and like I was saying, Father Brown kind of helped me grieve and mourn my student. I feel like Deborah Keenan kind of taught me how to write a poem to grieve. So I want to read this and then another poem that I wrote for students. So this poem by Deborah Keenan is for her mother. The poem's called I Knew Her Once. And the opening is a quote from Jean Garriguet, I think it is, Studies for an Actress. She prays now to the smallest things under the black brocade of pines. She prays for the wind muffled in them, for the fields and the shimmer of butterflies, for valerian, dianthus, columbine. She prays to pray, but cannot start. It's John Garriguet, Studies for an Actress. I knew her well, and once, and long ago. I knew her beautiful, wise, and angry. Knew her warm, and kind, and right. Knew her wrong, and sorry, and still. I knew her young, and nothing's changed. Knew her small, a bird, a shipwrecked thing. I knew her well, and not so well. Knew her broken as glass, strong as wind. I knew her holy, drenched and white. Knew what prayers she finally said. I knew her when sky was only sky. Knew her when her nerve flared and fled. She prays now to the smallest thing. I never see her anymore. Knew her well, and not so well. Knew the pines and columbine. I knew enough to leave her there. So Deborah saw probably a lot of versions of this book, and she knows that I overwrite, and probably it's still overwritten. But this was another poem that I wrote to 2 students who died tragically in a car accident in 2017 that I taught when they were freshmen. She saw a first draft of it, and it was way too much me and not enough getting out of the way and seeing them. So I think it's a better poem. I hope it honors Deanna and Chris, who died 4 years ago. This will be the last poem I read. The poem's called I Don't Want to Write a Poem for My Dead Students. Just last June, I watched them both walk across the stage, my dead students. And once I taught them 9th grade English while they were still alive, breathing, walking, talking. Someone drove a car the wrong way down I-94 and killed them. That's what happened. My students killed. My students? No. When I remember Deanna memorizing I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr., when I see her standing in front of her classmates saying those words and her classmates hearing them, that is not mine. It is not mine when she said she wanted to work for that kind of justice today. It is not mine when Chris is cutting up in class, making his stupid jokes, asking what it would take, for me to forget that he hadn't done his homework today. And I don't want to understand the cosmic calculus of this. And I don't want to think of forgiveness. I just want to cry big salty tears. I want long sucking sobs. I want this day to last a long, long time. The first day Deanna and Chris weren't walking and talking in the world, but I was writing this poem. Thanks, Phil.
Well, good evening. Thank you for being here. And thanks to Magers and Quinn for sponsoring this and many like this. So in the Star Tribune today, there's a story about Powell's bookstore in Portland, Oregon that is now in jeopardy. So we want to keep places like this alive and well here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So please read that in the paper today. I want to salute Norton Stillman, the publisher of Noden Press, the publisher of both of our books, sitting right here to my left. He's been a good friend and a wonderful champion of Minnesota writers and others for years. My book is called Ambiguous Parables, Poems and Prose of Loss and Renewal. And it's a collection of pieces that I've put together over the years. Here's the backstory. The collected prose and poetic pages herein are the voice of a man seeking comfort with ambiguity. What seems to be is not always what is. A lifelong quest has been to find words, the words of others through conversations, poetry, song lyrics, fiction, nonfiction, scriptures, and or my own words, to acknowledge and address ambiguous experiences. To find years ago, these lines in James Baldwin's Another Country resonated and affirmed my quest. Baldwin wrote, "One is never what one seems, never, and yet what one seems to be is probably in some sense almost exactly what one is." Ambiguity. So these pages affirm mystery, celebrate ambiguity, and affirm ever-changing lives. Part of the reason also for writing it is this paragraph. While many of the pieces are personal, I remind you, the reader, through the words of Frederick Buechner, my story is important not because it is mine, God knows, but if I tell it anything like right, the chances are that you will also recognize that in many ways it is also yours. It's a human story. So that's the ambiguity as well. So just a few pieces to kind of make this point of trying not to solve ambiguity, but how do I embrace it? It's a bit like the Rumi poem, this being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Welcome to entertain them all. And so I've been trying for a lifetime now to embrace ambiguity. Maybe this was one of my early teachers. I went home to North Carolina, as you heard in the introduction, some years ago. My dad was living in a body that was falling apart. On the odd years, they took something out. On the even years, they put something in. And my mom was moving further into the fog of dementia. And I walked in the front door from 1,200 miles away here in Minnesota, and my dad greeted me this way. "You think you're the only writer, don't you?" Was the greeting from my dad. Said with a smile and a tone of expectancy. I curiously awaited what was to follow, and out it tumbled, a pile of yellow pages with turned up corners, full of handwritten words thrust in the direction of the proud writer, by the proud writer. "Look at this." Little did I know that this was the written version of this man's life and legacy, and it was now in my hands. Unbeknownst to me, my brothers, and most astounding, our mother, Dad had found seclusion and creativity in a writer's den he created in the storage shed behind our parents' home. Steadily over a year or more, he had written his life story on these now marked and stained pages. "Would you type it for me?" he asked, inviting me to provide him with a service that would give more to the typist than either of us had expected. "Yes, of course," I replied. Later, after turning home, I began to read and type this gift, part memoir, part essay, sermon. The pages contained the life story of poverty, hope, the American dream, faith and family. It was honest, poignant, and full of the man I called Dad. What makes it all the more special was the surprise. This man was no writer. He was a talker. I've had very few letters or notes from him because he wrote so few. For him to write anything, especially his memoir, took special effort and love. Some stories are hard to write because of their content. Some others are hard to write because the author has little experience putting words to paper. Somehow Dad put pencil to yellow paper, the collection of which he waved in my face that day, months after he had started writing. No, I'm not the only writer in the family. Maybe that's part of how it began. So part of what I've been doing is, maybe it's part of being in this phase of life, some looking back and looking forward. Who was I then and who am I now? And so here was to have been the first poem of the book. I came and chose another one that I'll share with you in just a moment. What One Seems. Sometimes since then and there, the dreams, planted as perennials, turned out to be annuals instead. Sometime between there and then and here and now, the rules changed. Male expectations evolved. The man I am faced a crossroads. Sometime in the midst of here and now, my there and then shows up. Generations appear in one body. I listen attentively. Past and present overlap and collide. The man I am can from this distance see ways the boy got here. The boy, looking ahead, would have thought this man strange. That's the ambiguity, is it not, of how our lives have evolved. And so some years ago, I began to write 2 stanza poems, of the first one being a there and then poem, and then a here and now poem. I'll share 2 of 4 that are in the book. The first one's called Safe Places. As children, our games included safe places, bases where we were safe and free, lines that the monster intruder could not cross, areas off limits, out of the games, parents around whose legs we wrapped ourselves yelling, "You can't get me, I'm safe here." Now older, I'm still looking for safe places, but the fears inside seem to know the safe places I seek. They wait there patiently for my arrival, courage and faith, my only legs left to stand on. It was mentioned that I grew up in North Carolina, and so this is a piece that is part of my coming to grips, as we all need to come to grips with our racial history and some of the racial reckoning that we need to confront in our own selves. This is one called Marked Places. As children, we colored inside the lines. Black was black and white was white. Invisible markers segregated neighborhoods, but I saw, all knew the currency of that time, robbed neighbors of neighbors. Later, I met someone from there. The backstory is I did some work at the National Center for Family Literacy in Louisville, Kentucky, and one of the staff persons happened to be a Black woman who probably lived 1.5 miles from my home in North Carolina, and we grew up together. Later, I met someone from there. She could have been my childhood playmate. We had much in common, love of reading, tennis, families. We agreed that separated, distinct childhoods robbed us of each other, marking us for life. Now older, 2 grandparents eagerly show photos of grandchildren who behave in once unimaginable ways, coloring outside the lines of our childhood. We stare at each other, invisible markers still there, the intersection of privilege and history. there and then, and here and now. Here's a piece that I wrote and appeared in the St. Paul Pioneer Press some years ago on Father's Day, as I was coming to grips with being a father, and still am now as a father and grandfather. It's called Fatherhood. Is it something one assumes, becomes, or earns? Does it happen at conception, birth, acknowledgement, or at the moment of choice? Who confers it? The child? Society? The other parent? Oneself? Once begun, does it continue? Is it temporary? Does it come and go? Can one be more of, yes, even less of a father? How will I know when I become one? Tell me how it feels. How does one prepare? Questions gushing from deep inside as boys becoming men add to their role collection. A role so awesome the strongest can cringe in fright, and for which the weakest muster and discover courage never felt before. Fatherhood, whether birth, step, gay, adoptive, grand, or foster, can, when assumed, chosen, or acknowledged, not to mention if earned or conferred, become the most humbling, curious, unpredictable, exciting, warm, demanding, giving, liberating experience known to man. So, lest you think these are all of these kind of personal things that I've been ruminating about, my poet friends told me a number of times, Ted, just pay attention, walk around, look, listen, and then write. So this is a piece called Royalty. I was in St. Louis speaking at a conference there and walked by a restaurant, and it appeared that there was only one customer in the restaurant, and it evoked this poem called Royalty. Royalty. The man sitting alone in the restaurant. Had he asked for service for one? Attention to be paid only him? And if so, had the waitstaff cleared the restaurant, quickly dispersed confused diners, giving him the privacy he desired? Or had he come in at the wrong hour, one of those in-between sittings times? Did the locals know something about this place the stranger did not know until after eating his first bite? Whatever the reason, he sat like a king, receiving the services a man of his status deserved. Some years earlier, after a glorious concert in Amsterdam, my wife and I stopped at a restaurant, only to see the staff closing down for the evening. As we turned to leave, the owner escorted us back inside. The staff returned to their appointed stations, as we too received the elegant and unhurried care, the only customers to be seen. Everyone should be king or queen at least for one meal. Everyone should sit tall like the solitary man, like the couple enthralled earlier with music, filled in due course with hospitality-flavored food, flushed with regal embarrassment. I hope you've had the experience of at least one royal meal sometime in your life. I hope you're beginning to hear these stories of ambiguity. They're full of our lives, are they not? This is one from a consultant of mine. It's a piece called Acorns, Beacorns, and Seacorns. The botanical consultant directed attention to the object of his study, a patch of grass covered by acorns, shadowed by the aging parent oak. He picked acorns for closer study. They're not all the same, Grandpa. Look, this one is green, that one brown, this one has no cap. Where is the cap? Here's a double. Two together. How did they do that? Buckets were found. We began gathering and sorting look-alikes assigned to their own homes. Grandpa, these are not all acorns. They're not all alike. Grandpa, some are beacorns, some are seacorns. How do we decide which are which? I had, without much thought, signed up for this research project when my daughter was pregnant. Had there been fine print, I would have read, when one becomes a grandpa, a paradigm shifts. Be prepared for questions. Little did I know that being a grandpa means seeing acorns differently. This upper level course was taught by a botanist with no shingle or degree, but with eyes, thoughts, and questions. I wish more of my earlier teachers had said, "Grandpa, look!" So there you are. Well, the last, when I was putting together this book and wanting to submit it to Norton to see if he might publish it, my wife and I went for our 41st anniversary for our first escape from the pandemic up to Duluth. We were still quarantined. This was in July 2020, and just having a wonderful time there to be together for a few days, celebrate 41 years of marriage, do some kind of life review, look at our future, talk about our bodies, what could we do, how can we do it, and all of the rest, only to have her within 48 hours of coming home to suddenly die of cardiac arrest, suddenly with no history of heart disease. And so the book was laid aside as I was dealing with her death and coming to grips, as I still am now, 16, 17 months later with her death, and now being a solo man, a widower, a single in those ways. And so I had to decide after about 3 months, was I ready to pick up the manuscript and began to revise it again, and then had to decide also, do I include any Marge poems? And my poet friends and others said, "Ted, I think it's probably too early." And I agreed. But I did include this tribute poem as the first poem of the book. I will color this time. I will color this time with more than a black armband, a past marker of death. I presume you're old enough to be aware that in earlier times people wore a black armband or black garments, or for sometimes a week, a month, a year. And so I will color this time with more than a black armband, a past marker of death. I will reach for brilliant, bold, bright colors and beiges, blues, and blush. I yearn for an array of colors similar to the rainbow of flowers sent so soon after her death, reminding me of the colorful life that we shared and that I can still have. So it's the oscillation between the grieving, I'm missing her, but also thankful that we had those 41 years of colorful life together. A poem that's not in a book that I've written more recently, I'm going to share. Who knows where this might appear at some time, but I discovered after she died that we each brought 2 children to our marriage those years ago, and realized after she died that she and our daughter, her daughter, birth daughter, my stepdaughter, that my stepdaughter and we'd been part of a 3-legged stool relationship. Because of the closeness of the mother-daughter bond, Marge and our daughter were just forged. And so if I had anything with my daughter alone, Marge was always present in some way. If I came back and shared stories of what my daughter and I had done, Marge wanted to hear those stories. And so it was just as if it was always a 3-legged stool. And so on my daughter's birthday, which was just a few days before Marge died, so we had the normal birthday in 2020, but when 21 came, I realized I needed to write her about the ambiguity of our relationship for our 41 years together. It's called Forging Dance Moves. Then, referring back to July 2020, then everything changed. The relationship patterns begun 4 decades earlier, adjusted and tweaked along the way, required a review. When our go-between departed, leaving us to forge new ties, person to person, just the 2 of us, not our usual threesome, 'twas a formidable task. 4 decades of patterns do not change easily or quickly. Ambiguity was immediately present. Now, 12 months later, looking back and forward, we have weaved to and fro like 2 dancers eagerly wanting to make fluid moves. Cautious, yes. Taking timid risk, yes. yet steadily over time relaxing with an assurance. Hey, we can do this. We have to do this. We want to do this. Our go-between would want things to go well. It's the ambiguity of having to reintroduce two people of 41 years of history. Maybe just two more, and then let's have some discussions with Zach and me. We both are eager for that. In 1975, I spent a month with Virginia Satir, a great family therapist and teacher, and I was going to spend a month along with her at a family therapy workshop up in Banff, Alberta. She always chose beautiful places for her trainings, and so here we were in the mountains of Alberta. But I'd been warned before going that if I spent a day with her or had heard a talk with her before, that I didn't need to go for a month. It wasn't worth it. Ted, she's just charismatic. If you've seen her, you've already got it. Just read her books, Ted. Don't go. Don't waste the money. And they said, if you go, people are just going to be fawning all over her. And so I arrived. And so here's a poem called Oh, Ted, Ted, Ted. Oh, Ted, 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 don't let the way others are treating me get in the way of what you and I can do while here. She was the famous therapist. Others seemed to be in awe of her. Their adulations dominated early training sessions. She sat at the lunch table. This was like the third day in, after 2 or 3 days of the fawning. And then I sit down to lunch, and who should come to my table but this therapist? She sat at my lunch table, just the two of us. Asked how the month-long workshop was going. I took a breath. I told her of my displeasure. The month of training had become days of fawning. I swallowed, already packing my departure bags. It was at that moment I experienced therapy at its best. It was all of 45 seconds, worth the cost of the whole month. Ted, 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 don't let the way others are treating me get in the way of what you and I can create. It was a life lesson, remembered now, learned then, practice often, but not often enough. Ted, Ted, Ted. Let all the projections of other people sort of get in the way. Maybe one more to urge us to extend our advanced directives at this phase of our life. This is one called Aunt Frances. I've been wondering about Aunt Frances, curious about her parts, and what the medical students learned from her when she died at age 91. Her children gave her body to science as they had been directed. I can imagine that she just lay on the table. The medical students gathered round for the teaching day about older bodies. I'm certain that she sat up and told those students a thing or two about persons, not diseases, to avoid patronizing condescension, the importance of story gathering, meet patients where they are, spend a bit of time with each. She would have said it straight, with a gleam in her eye, and with a smile that would soften her students. Few would have met anyone like her, someone like her, alive or dead. Because they did, their practices will never be the same. Here. Sure. Let's take any questions or comments either to both of us about writing or our craft or specifically about either of the poets and the poems, okay? All right. Raise your hand and probably you can lower your mask if you want to say something and we'll listen to you. Yeah.
So how old were you when you started writing? Like writing professionally, if you will?
No, we both can answer that. Professionally, not until later in life. I was encouraged as a child, but it was kind of widespread encouragement from teachers around math and geography and literature and writing. So it wasn't that in high school that I was known as a writer. I was just kind of a sort of an all-around guy in some ways. But beginning probably in college first, I began to get more attached to literature and to listen to the cadence even of some of the instructors in college. And what really was a turning point was in graduate school and then out of graduate school to learn something that now is called bibliotherapy, poetry therapy. And it's the use of literary resources, song lyrics, anecdotes, your own stories to prompt others to find their voice. And people who've written about narrative therapy say that they hear some of the same stories from their clients that they read in fiction. And it's putting those together, and that's when I really got turned on and began to find my voice and began to write. And so now I've got bucket loads of old boxes full of some of the writing, and this is a combination of more current ones as well as ones over time. When did you start writing? Early on?
Yeah. So I was probably like 13 or 14 when I was like, I want to be a writer. And yeah, this kind of, I was, writing's always kind of been a grounding practice for me. It's similar to like prayer. Prayer and writing kind of go together for me. But yeah, I used to love, fiction was my thing. I used to really love to write stories. And then I think once I started teaching high school, I didn't have time. And I found that actually if I could just get to like the moment in a poem, it felt as satisfying or even more satisfying than a story. So I kind of switched gears. Work.
Yes. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Do your students appreciate your poetry or what you share with them?
Yeah, I mean, so we write a lot together. We at Cristo Rey, pretty much the whole English department does something called workshop model instruction. So yeah, I write with them. We do a lot of different prompts, poetry, fiction, essays. And yeah, I don't know if they appreciate my poetry, but they appreciate writing poetry. And just hearing about bibliotherapy is really intriguing to me, just because a lot of stuff gets triggered for students writing about different memories from the past. So I'd be really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, just a comment about that, and some of you may know something about it. Elizabeth Bork Johnson and I had this book published also by Noden a few years ago, The Wind Blows, the Ice Breaks, and it's 140 poems by over 100 Minnesota poets addressing themes of loss and renewal. And sometimes there's just a line that grabs you that I think, that the students, sometimes it only takes a line. This is a Louise Erdrich's poem called Grief, and it's just this line: sometimes you have to take your own hand. Sometimes you have to take your own hand. It's not that you have to write the chapter or the whole book, but just a line can be a grabber, and let the students or people in a grief support group simply go with that. Where does that take them? Who's holding your hand, or can you hold your own, and all the rest? Other questions or comments? Yes.
Well, just to follow up on that hand-holding thing, we had a senior student at St. Catherine some years ago, black woman, and she would take history, then she'd take English, she would take Spanish, she'd take French. She was just a marvelous woman. She danced with Bojangles. Anyway, she used to say to other students, "You don't hold his hand. You let him hold your hand, because he won't let go." And that black lilt, and I remember one of the French teachers saying that over and over and over to these students that would come weeping about this problem and that. You don't hold his hand, you let him hold your hand.
What reminds me of Joyce Sutphen's poem, Now That Anything Can Happen, that was written after the 35W bridge collapsed. And it ends up, now that you know that anything can happen, whose hand are you holding? Whose heart is beating inside you? What will you do now that you know anything can happen? It's the hauntedness of who's there for you. Yeah. Anything else before you buy all the books in the store?
Just thank you.
Oh.
It's really nice to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Deborah Keenan.